Well, hi there, and welcome to week 2 of the Emotionally Healthy Woman podcast. I am your co host, Kathy Bruce, and this podcast features a series of my conversations with author Geri Scazzero based on her book, The Emotionally Healthy Woman. And if you were with us last week, you'll know that we talked about quit being afraid of what others think. And this week, we are tackling the topic, quit lying. So I would love now to introduce Geri Scazzero. Geri, I have to tell you, this is one of the hardest chapters for me personally in the book. And I was thinking about this, this morning as we were preparing for this. And one of the things that's helped me, which I had to give a quick plug for, because if our listeners have not read or done the Emotionally Healthy Relationships study, there is a chapter in there about exploring the iceberg and really getting to our deep feelings and letting them surface so we understand them. And often, I know for me, my feelings or my lack of understanding my feelings is what leads me to the temptation to want to lie.
Yes. Yeah, sure. I mean, like fear,
Yes.
you get in touch with your fear and you realize, oh, I was really afraid to tell them what I really thought or felt. I could see that connection for sure.
Yes. And so I'm super excited to explore this topic with you, quit lying, this morning. And we're going to just dive right in if you're ready.
Ready.
I have so many questions, but we're gonna start. We're gonna try and keep to our time frame here. But I just wanted to start off with this. One of the things that you say in this chapter of Quit Lying, you say, as followers of Jesus, the degree to which we live in truth is the degree to which we are free. And I wondered, I mean, this is just such a powerful statement. And I was actually preaching just on freedom this past Sunday at my church and this idea of being free in Christ. And I think, this is so powerful. Living in truth, the degree to which we live in truth is the degree to which we are free. And I wondered if you could perhaps elaborate on this a little more for us this morning.
Sure. When you're not living in truth and honesty, then you really have a divided self
Mm,
because you're saying or being or doing something on the outside that isn't true of who you are on the inside. And
mm,
that's a divided self. That's a person that isn't whole. That's a person that's not integrated. And we're not able to be truly ourselves, truly authentic, which goes hand in hand with freedom, unless you are honest. And so yeah, I mean, you can't be real on the outside if you're not real on the inside.
mm,
And again, our authenticity is very, and our realness is tied to our experience of freedom. And again, freedom isn't something just on the outside. Freedom is
right,
something that flows from the inside.
right.
I also think I probably have to mention at the beginning here that there's really a big spectrum of lying. Right? There's a
Mm,
spectrum of what our culture has called, or our families have called, little white lies.
right.
It can be anything from, giving as leaders less than truthful feedback to our staff, um, or we maybe don't want to hurt someone's feelings, so we don't tell them what we really think and feel, whether it's about their hair or their outfit or whatever. Um, but then there's, a bigger spectrum. I mean, a deeper spectrum where we're not even being honest with the people we live with, or if
Right.
you're married, your spouse. And then, of course, if people are in any kind of addiction, whether it's social media, drinking, immorality, ethical issues, you have to lie a lot.
Mm,
And then you forget even, um, yeah, that's a real entrapment. I mean, that's a deeper, deeper bondage because you can't even remember, what did I tell that person? What did I say to cover up last time? So there is a spectrum of lying. I mean, I don't, we'll talk. I know that's going to come out later. We'll talk about certain situations. But yes, I love what Pope John Paul II said: truth and freedom go hand in hand. If you lose one of them, you lose the other.
mm,
So
yeah.
I didn't really understand that until I lived on the inside of it. I didn't realize how unfree I was when I was not declaring myself honestly to people. Of course, I now know the difference. It's huge, and there's just no going back.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's, again, so many of these topics we're going to be covering in this podcast. There's sort of this unveiling once you realize, that you've been doing it, you can't help but start to see it more. And then again, it becomes, what we practice, right, is the habits that we build. And so once you start realizing it, you can start to stop lying. And that's this whole point, is to quit lying.
Right.
But
Right.
it takes an awareness for
It does.
sure
It
to
does.
get there. So, well, so we have a few things we want to cover in this chapter today, and I wanted to highlight, there are sort of three different categories that you talk about, so well outlined in this chapter. And we're gonna hit each one of them. And the first one is this idea of lying to self. And I wondered if we could talk about, there's a quote you have in the book by Virginia Satir, that says, most of us live inhuman lives because we live inhuman rules about ourselves. This hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, you give some great examples in here. I'm just going to name a couple. You give a lot of them, but such good examples. So for instance, don't show your feelings, don't show off, don't talk back, always be nice, which is something we talked about in last week's podcast, right? About how the church rewards niceness.
Not truth always, but niceness.
Right. Obey authority at all times, always be on time. I mean, these are just a few. And I will tell you, I mean, I grew up with these messages, right? In my family of origin, I grew up with these messages. They are scripts in my head. These are things I subconsciously tell myself. I mean, the time thing, always be on time. I am like a mess if I'm late to things.
Right.
And it's like these are inhuman, right? Because we are human beings. We're not inhuman, and we're human beings. We're gonna fail. We're gonna mess up. And so what can you talk just a little bit about this powerful quote? Because I just think it's incredibly revelatory.
It is. I mean, Virginia Satir did such a great service to humanity by calling out these inhuman rules that are actually, like, most of us were raised in them. And again, to give mercy and compassion to the people who raised us, they had these rules because the people who raised them had those rules.
Yeah.
But they are inhuman, and we grow up believe it's amazing how many inhuman rules we believe. So don't show your feelings is inhuman. It's just inhuman. We are called to show our feelings. We are created to show our feelings. We are meant to show our feelings. Of course, it means another story is how we do it. And that's what I love about this very wise Virginia Satir, is that she would say, you don't have to throw out your family rules, but you need to adapt them. So we show our feelings, but it's how we show them, how we express them, don't show off. Well, that came out of a fear of people thinking somebody's arrogant. And yet, no, it's a beautiful thing to boast about my accomplishments in a healthy way. There's healthy boasting and embracing a gift that God's given you and a job well done. That's not showing off. And
so
yet,
can I push back on that for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, because I think about, I mean, when I was in my 20s, I sort of hit the highlight of my theater career. And I got a great job in New York on the Broadway stage. And I was terrified to talk to anybody about it, or when people would ask me about it, I felt like I was not being a humble Christian to talk about it. So is that what you're talking about? I mean, I don't know where that came from, but I told myself that it would be a lack of humility to talk about that job to
Yes. So,
others.
and you mentioned it in a Christian context. That just comes out of, unfortunately, bad theology that got into this church. I mean, just bad theology. And that has caused these rules to be part of our churches. Um, and, again, the whole thing around, we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks, around anger, sadness, fear, all those emotions, like don't show your feelings. But it causes us to get disconnected and divided into
Mm,
human self. And the other, so about a job well done, a gift. God's given you a gift to and um, to act, to art. It's such an incredible art that can convey truth and in ways that not words can't always, or I just, it's unbelievable medium for bringing all the things that God is for: love, truth, fun, into our lives. But somehow you got a message from your family and the church uh, about pride. Now there is a very real unhealthy pride and
mm-hmm,
arrogance. There is.
mm-hmm.
Pride does go before the fall. You think of yourself more highly than you ought, but that's not an integrated person. As an actor, you can be a very integrated person because you know your limits, you know your talents, like you've got yourself, you know in balance, so to speak. But to yes, but I think it's wonderful to boast in healthy ways about our accomplishments. I mean, I'm like I said, I was really boasting about that shower. That turned out amazing.
For
It's like,
our listeners, I
oh
have to say, Jerry put on a beautiful Zoom
my,
baby shower for her daughter.
right.
Incredible.
And I was, that's what celebration is about, isn't it? We,
Mm,
we pause to celebrate
mm.
wonderful things in our life. So it's sad that you had to experience that conflict, that inner conflict of, I'm doing something I love, but I feel guilty loving it so much. And,
Right.
and
Or I'm afraid I'm going to be prideful in talking about it. And so it becomes almost sort of a false humility,
exactly.
which is not healthy and an
Not
internal struggle, like you said.
right.
So
Right.
thank you for indulging me in that, because that was a big lie in my 20s. I literally believed that I would be prideful if I talked about what I did in the church, and even like beyond, when I got out of the theater business, I would often not share that part of my life with people out of a sense of, oh, I don't want to be prideful talking about this, when I robbed myself of that celebration, like you said.
Yes, 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 yes. Yeah. And we've known several actors who have beautiful integration of their personhood, their faith, and, you know, um, bring it to full hilt on the stage, which is beautiful.
It's
They're not
amazing.
arrogant people at all. So,
Yeah. Okay. I derailed us too. Were there any of these other inhuman rules you wanted to touch on? Because
just,
they're so
yeah,
powerful.
yeah, just the one, they're all inhuman. I mean, don't obey authority at all times. I mean, that's just outright dangerous.
Mm,
I mean, it almost sounds like you can't question authority, and healthy authority invites curiosity and gives explanations, isn't highly defensive. So that would just be, but I know there are, organizations and churches that give off that, maybe that's not even said, but they certainly give off a sense of, you should, just obey us and don't ask or whatever. Um, I'm with always be nice. I'm very aware of this with my 4-year-old granddaughter now, because she's at an age where she's just saying things
mm,
um, to a person or people, or in a context, or even to us. And I'm just like, I get a little whiplash. I'm thinking, you can't say that. That's not nice. But it's not, it's again, you want to adapt it. It becomes not a moment of scolding, but a moment of shepherding. Hey,
mm.
honey, this is how we talk to people, in kind ways.
Right.
And so I have to be careful. My daughter's doing it much better than me, her grandmother, and not kind of getting triggered when she doesn't talk nice, probably because it was deeper in me.
Mm.
And hopefully I healed some of that. It was a little less than my daughter, but I'm just aware of how it still lives. There's residue in me about always be nice. And when she says something that's not nice, I can feel that little bit of a trigger in myself,
Right, right. Yeah, that's good. And I think I love what you talk about, we're going to move on here to the second piece, but also that lying to self and how that brings up just the physicality of the turmoil. Like you said, just how it triggered something in you. There's an actual physical reaction often that discord that's happening internally when we're lying to ourselves. God uses our bodies to show us.
Yes. And again, that's a whole podcast. We've talked about that because most people do not recognize it. It passes, the bodily feeling passes right by because I would say most people are not aware of what's going on.
Right. Or they just ignore it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. All right. So the second sort of area of lying, as you have in here, is lying to others. So we struggle with lying to ourselves, but lying to others. And so I wanted to ask you, this is kind of a little pushback question, but isn't it sometimes the most loving thing to not be totally honest with other people out of love? And I'm not meaning like big lies, right? But like I could just, like, as I read, this chapter and I this section in particular, I think about like, well, isn't it the Christian thing to do to like, not be totally honest and harsh sometimes?
What do you, it sounds like you have like something in mind. Do you have an example?
Well, just like, I know. Okay. So I know what you're going to say. I do have an example. So for instance, my husband, his one of his main love languages is verbal affirmation, right? So he needs that validation. Now that's a whole other podcast. But he needs that validation, right? And so if he comes to me and he's had a haircut, right? I know he's coming to me right after the haircut for some words of affirmation about how good it looks. And so if he's had a bad day or something and he comes and I don't really think it's a very flattering haircut, isn't it the more loving thing to say, oh, yeah, they did a good job? Or
Right. Yes.
I can't believe I'm alone in this.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. And it's certainly the flip too, where the wife comes to the husband and says, "Hey, honey, how do you like my haircut?" There's a really good example of that in the book. And there's so much going on there. Again, why is your husband asking you that question in the first place? Is it really an honest question? Does he really want to know, or is he looking for affirmation? So he's not kind of even being like, what's the difference between him saying, hey, Kathy, how do you like my haircut? Versus, I'm feeling a little insecure about this haircut I got. And I'm just wondering what you're thinking. Like that's different than fishing for a compliment in an indirect way.
Right.
So again, this is kind of loaded because it depends on the safety of the relationship, right? In the marriage.
Right.
So you can respond different ways, but I guess for you, being responsible for you in that context is, why are you saying what you're saying? What's going on in your heart? Because if you say to him, you can tell this isn't the right moment to, like, maybe he's in a fragile moment and maybe it's not the time to say what you say, hey, honey, you know what? It's fine. Or I don't know what you say.
Okay. So you're agreeing it is hard. It's a hard,
no. I think it's not hard. It's not that it's hard. It's being thoughtful and knowing that you are attending to his needs in this moment. And so you're saying what you're saying. And I don't want to call it lying. I mean, if you can call it, but other times it is outright lying. Like, yes. Yeah, honey, because that's the level of relationship. There isn't that kind of safety in between the spouses to say what we really think and feel. And that's another huge issue. So, but as you grow in learning how to speak truth, you will grow in your thoughtful responses.
Mm,
And then you will kind of know how to attend to that situation. I think families with very different political views, especially in this polarized political year we just came out of, and that families were on different sides of it, it was okay. I may choose. I'm choosing now. So I'm with a family member. They make a remark that I don't agree with at all, but I'm I'm leaving it alone.
mm,
Because in my case, in that moment, I'm deciding that's the wise thing to do. I know what I'm doing. I'm doing it thoughtfully
right.
versus I could not be saying anything because I'm afraid of how they'll react if I say something. It goes back to that motivation that we talked about last week. Again, in
Right.
Christianity, motivation is everything. So when you're speaking about truth, no, I do think it's really important to be, um, rigorously honest. That should be your lifestyle, rigorous, honestly. But that must be done. There's timing, there's respectfulness, there's clarity. Um, there are things that are going around the way we speak truth.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. And I think often, and I use that example because I'm like, that's just a silly but small, truthful example of where the
Yeah.
temptation for me would be the easy way out of not being thoughtful, right? Of just, oh, out of love, because I know he needs the validation, I'll just tell him it looks great, right? And I don't think it looks great. so I'm
Yep.
lying. I'm
Yeah.
lying. And
Right.
that's, so that's I really like how you said that, is that the intentionality and the thoughtfulness of why we're saying what we're saying, and that there
Right.
is a way to still be loving, still be honest. Those things
Absolutely.
are not, they don't have to be separate. So,
Right. And that he has to do his work too. Right. And so when you speak truth, believe me, it gives other people permission to speak truth as well. But
mm,
how we speak truth makes all the difference.
mm,
And especially timing and respectfulness and clarity. I mean, those things are really, really important.
yeah. Yeah. This is good. So our last sort of area of lying that
Mhm.
you talk about in the chapter is lying to God.
Yes.
And so I wondered if you could give us, an example of ways that you have lied to God in the past, and sort of how you came to realize that that's what you were doing. Because we talked about how sometimes even in the lying to self realm, we're not even aware of it. And I think I know for me, if there are probably times when I can think of where I've been lying to God and not even aware of it. So I just wondered if you had an example you could share.
Well, let's say, for example, you're having feelings that are uncomfortable for you. You're feeling angry. You're feeling disappointment. You're feeling angry and you have a rule against anger. You're feeling disappointment and you have a rule against disappointment. You have shame, and we have a feeling against shame, right? So if I have a rule against something, then I'm probably going to cut myself off from it. I'm
Mm,
not allowing myself to really feel it, which means I'm not going to admit it to myself. And so if I'm not admitting something to myself, then I am not admitting it. It's I'm probably not admitting it to God,
mm,
because there is a direct correlation between my interconnectedness, not just with myself, with God, and with others. And so I like to say, if I'm cutting myself off from myself, then I'm cutting myself off from God.
mm,
If I am cutting myself off from myself, then I'm probably very likely, I mean, it just seems to me it goes hand in hand. Because
right.
if I'm not admitting something to myself, then I'm not going to admit it to God.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of things I cut myself off from. And you know what the interesting thing is, this, because we're talking about lying to God, but the most dangerous one, we're talking about lying to yourself, lying to others, and lying to God. But the most dangerous one is lying to yourself. Because if you're lying to yourself, you are in denial and illusion, which means you are delusional. That's scary. You're actually delusional when you're not in reality. And you're not in reality when you're lying to yourself, when you're pretending everything's fine when it's not, when you're not admitting what you're really thinking and feeling. I mean, so this is really big territory for Christian discipleship.
Yeah. And it sounds like what you're saying is, so like if you are lying to yourself, that's just going to flow into the other areas.
How can it not?
It can't not. Right.
It can't not.
Right.
It can't not. So that's why there's such a direct correlation between what goes on with me is going on with God or not going. So a starting point is what is going on inside of me. And
and that's where we started the podcast today. That's the Explore the Iceberg tool is just tremendous. I mean, when I sit and journal, and often in COVID, in our COVID land time, that's, it feels like Groundhog Day every day. and so I will sit with my journal and I will just explore the iceberg and try and get in touch with what am I really feeling? Because half the time I don't even know.
We've mentioned that Explore the Iceberg several times. So just for our listeners' sake, it's 4 questions that you journal around. What am I mad about? What am I sad about? What am I anxious about? And what am I glad about? So mad, sad, great, and glad.
Yeah. And it's an easy structure to remember and get our feelings out so we can address them.
If we're willing to be rigorously honest.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, you can be lying in your journal as well.
That's true, Geri. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Well, we could talk.
You can be lying in those small groups. You can be lying in those group. You can be lying in those women's groups.
That's true. That's true. That's very true. And that's actually a great segue for kind of how we want to wrap this up today is, we've been talking a little about, how do we apply this chapter, right? There's so much here. And I think, often it's easy to sort of jump to the lying to others, right? Like, obviously we don't want to lie to others. I mean, that's just not, it doesn't honor God. It doesn't honor ourselves and doesn't honor the other person. And so we, I had mentioned to you, I was wondering if we could maybe end the podcast with a little role play, if you'd be down for that.
Absolutely.
All right. So I'm just going to hopefully this will be an example, for folks that will be helpful. But what I was telling Geri earlier was that I had a situation where, as we know, in COVID, we are limited in terms of getting our kids together with other kids. And so I was on a text thread with a couple moms. We were trying to get our teenagers together. And one of the moms I've never met before. And she had suggested taking them to like an escape room type of thing where where the kids go in and that was something she felt comfortable with. I didn't feel comfortable with it because all I'm thinking about is like all the germs of all the other kids that have been in there and they probably didn't sanitize it.
Right.
And
let me just interrupt because I think what a good way to do this is without giving them too much detail, we can go into it. But I think I should play you.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to be you and you're going to be that woman.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Okay. So,
and we're going to do it 2 ways. We're going to do it, quote unquote, the wrong way, the dishonest way. And then we're going to do it the honest way.
Great. Okay. So, let's see. I'm Mary.
Okay. I'm Kathy.
And you're me. So Kathy, I was thinking it would be really great if we could get the kids together to go to do one of those escape rooms. They just need to get out of the house and do, they just need to be around each other and moving around, and they've been cooped up during COVID. So how does that sound?
Okay.
Oh, great. Okay. So we can go ahead and plan that for Saturday. We'll take them to the escape room.
Sure.
Okay, great.
Good. Okay, so Kathy just lied. She doesn't want her son to go to the escape room. But she was more worried about this woman's judgment of how this woman would perceive her for not agreeing with her. And there's some other backdrop here, but we'll get to that now when we have the honest conversation.
That's spot on, Geri. Spot on. All right. All right. So this is the right way to do this without lying. Kathy, so I was thinking maybe we could get the kids together and we could maybe take them to an escape room. You know, they've been cooped up all through COVID, and it'd be great to just let them get out and run around a little bit. So what do you think if we schedule that for Saturday?
Oh, Mary. Oof. You know, I'm actually, I'm got to think about this because I was okay going to the restaurant, but for some reason I'm really having like difficulty with them going to the escape room because it's a more enclosed, smaller space. And
oh yeah, but it would just be the three of them. Like it would just be the three of them in the room. It wouldn't be any other kids at that same time.
That's true. That is true. But boy, there's still something that in me that's just really, really uncomfortable about that. So I'm gonna pass this time, but I sure hope they can do it in the future together.
Okay. Wow, Geri, that was amazing.
How did I do, Kathy?
That was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
And wait a minute, what was fantastic about it?
It was so thoughtful. Like you were, and I know our listeners can't see us on this podcast right now, but even just the way you were very thoughtfully thinking through how to respectfully say no, which is what you did.
But I was also, which you couldn't see, but I was also being very respectfully Kathy in her body and validating what she was feeling in her body.
Yeah.
And that was really important for me as Kathy to validate myself and listen to my body, because I'm telling you, your body speaks the truth.
Yes. Yes.
And our words don't always speak the truth, but our bodies do. And so I had to pay attention to my body in that moment of discomfort. And then, have this. And now, again, in this case, it was a quick little conversation in my head. I could have said, hey, Mary, can I just have a few days to think about this? Let me call you tomorrow. I just need to think about it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Or I just have that quick conversation in my head and say, you know what? I'm allowed to be uncomfortable with this, and I can validate that. And I'm not a bad person for not wanting to do this. Even though we went to a restaurant and that was a whole different situation. It's like I had this quick little conversation to get in touch with what I'm really thinking and feeling, and deliver a thoughtful. And of course, that gets easier the more practice.
Well, and I love what you said about just taking a time and maybe responding the next day. I've learned a lot over the years about sleeping on it, right?
Absolutely.
Like when things like this occur and there's inner conflict in me, I'll often say, hey, let's not make a decision about that today. Let me sleep on it and can we chat about it tomorrow?
Yeah.
And often I'll wake up the next day and have a completely different perspective about it. But again, it's giving myself the space to really unpack what I'm feeling and thinking.
Absolutely. Because in that moment, you're like, all this stuff is going on in your head. Like, well, I did say yes to the restaurant, and that sounds like I'm being hypocritical. And I mean, it needed some weigh in. It did.
Yeah.
And it needed some space to be, to think about it. So anyway.
Yeah. Thank you for engaging me in that role play. You do it so well. And hopefully that was a helpful example to our listeners as we wrap up today.
Yes. And Kathy, let me just end part of our time here saying one of the keys to speaking truth, to stop lying and speaking truth, is knowing how to do it. Again, skills. The book does talk about how to speak, honestly, respectfully, clearly, and timely, but it doesn't, but it's another whole thing to actually do it. And again, the relationship course, uh, does it cover speaking? Now I'm trying to think, does listening, do we do speaking? I don't even
Well,
remember.
we do listening incarnate. Well, not in the woman's book, but in the emotionally healthy
Yes,
relationship
yes,
book.
yes.
Absolutely.
But anyway, it becomes a lot less scary.
Yep.
You learn, again, some sentence stems for beginning to know how to speak truthfully.
Yep. So good. Well, Geri, thank you so much for spending this time. And listeners, we will see you next time on Emotionally Healthy Woman Podcast.